I was driving toward my daughter's house that evening, the thought of a warm dinner together filling me with a simple kind of happiness. The city lights flickered on as dusk spread across Seattle, and for once I allowed myself to breathe. No board meetings, no deadlines, no crisis, just family. Then my phone vibrated on the passenger seat. A message. From Michael Reed, my lawyer. Call me urgently. Just 4 words, but they knocked the air out of my chest. My hands tightened on the wheel. Michael never used words lightly, especially when it concerned me or Hansen Tech. I pulled over the world around me, suddenly muffled as if holding its breath. My heart hammered as I pressed his name and lifted the phone to my ear. Michael. His voice came through cold and steady like steel, professional, cautious. We need to talk. It's about Ida. My daughter's name was enough to make my pulse falter. What about her? There was the faintest pause, then the blow landed. She filed a lawsuit. She's asking the court to declare you incompetent to run Hansen Tech. The words hit me like ice water to the face. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. That's impossible. She's my daughter. I'm afraid it's very real, he continued. She's not alone. She has a group of shareholders backing her. They're claiming your judgment has been compromised by emotional instability. My fingers went numb, the phone nearly slipping from my grasp. 30 years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice. 30 years building Hansen Tech brick by brick with the dream that one day I'd pass it down to her. And now she was leading the charge to strip it all away from me. I sank into my chair when I reached the office, the Seattle skyline stretching beyond the glass walls. It blurred before my eyes as if the rain streaking down the windows had found its way inside me. My sanctuary, my fortress of achievement, suddenly felt like a cell closing in. How much time? I forced the words out. 1 week, Michael replied. The hearing is in 1 week. We'll need to prepare everything: financial records, medical documentation, proving your competence, testimonies from character witnesses. Her team has been building this for months. My mouth went dry. Months she's been planning this? Yes, Michael said. His voice was steady, but beneath it I sensed urgency. They have paperwork reports of supposedly erratic financial decisions, testimonies from board meetings. They're painting you as unstable, impulsive, a man who has lost control. I shot up from my chair, pacing my reflection, jagged in the dark window. The rain outside streamed down like tears I couldn't bring myself to shed. That's absurd, I've never. The words faltered, doubt clawed at me. Had I been too passionate in those meetings? Had my fierce defense of old strategies come across as something else? Michael didn't answer immediately, and that silence was louder than any verdict. Who else knows? I finally asked. The filing is sealed for now, but she has allies: James Corbin, Patricia Wheeler, and 3 others. They're meeting with her tomorrow. She's promising them higher dividends under new leadership. Her leadership. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. My daughter, my own brilliant, ambitious daughter, wasn't just turning against me. She was offering my life's work to others like it was hers to give. The betrayal was sharper than any corporate defeat I'd ever faced. This wasn't just business. This was blood. This was family. What do you need from me? My voice was quieter now, stripped of its usual command. Everything. Every document, every record that proves your stability and your competence. We'll build this case from the ground up, but we only have 7 days. 7 days. A week ago, I had been preparing to announce her promotion, my intention to name her CEO within the year. I had rehearsed the words in my head. It was supposed to be my proudest moment as a father. Now she was trying to bury me. Michael's voice cut into my thoughts. And listen, don't confront her. Not yet. We need to understand her full strategy before you make a move. When the call ended, silence flooded the room. I sat there as the light drained from the sky. Below me, the city glittered alive and indifferent, while the world I had built crumbled in shadows. Mechanically, I gathered my things: coat, briefcase, keys. The same routine I'd carried out for 30 years. But tonight, each motion felt hollow, stripped of meaning. Everything had changed in a single phone call. The elevator ride down was suffocatingly quiet. By the time the doors opened, I no longer recognized the man reflected in the mirrored walls. 50 floors down, the elevator doors opened, and I stepped into the garage. My legs betrayed me, unsteady, as though the ground itself had shifted. The concrete smelled of oil and dampness, but I hardly noticed. I lowered myself into the driver's seat and sat there unmoving for what must have been 10 minutes. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly the leather creaked, but no strength could steady the storm inside my chest. Ida, my daughter, my blood. I replayed Michael's words in my mind like a cruel echo I couldn't silence. She was having dinner with her family tonight, our weekly tradition, the ritual that was supposed to remind us of who we were, beneath the titles and balance sheets. Could I go and sit across from her, smile break, bread talk about Sophie's drawings while knowing she was quietly orchestrating my ruin? The thought sickened me. Yet another thought, colder, steadier, forced its way through. Maybe I needed to see her, look into her eyes, study her face, see if there was still a trace of the daughter I raised, or only the mask of the enemy she'd become. I started the engine, the car humming to life, and pulled into the pulsing veins of Seattle's evening traffic. Headlights blurred through streaks of rain on the windshield as I drove toward Bellevue, toward answers I wasn't sure I wanted but couldn't avoid. By the time I reached her, street night had fully settled. The house glowed warm against the dark, the picture of comfort. My hand hesitated on the doorbell, but I never pressed it. The door opened before I could knock. Ida stood there, wrapped in a cream sweater, her smile measured, calibrated to perfection. Dad, right on time. Her hug was gentle but rehearsed, like a scene she'd practiced in a mirror. The faint scent of her perfume mingled with roasted chicken drifting from the kitchen. Come in, it's freezing out there. I studied her face as she stepped back. Not a crack in the mask. Not even a hairline fracture. Sophie's been asking about Grandpa all day, she added, leading me through the foyer, her tone warm, casual. She drew you another picture. The house smelled of family and comfort on the surface, but beneath it I smelled only betrayal. The faintest bitterness, like smoke under the sweetness. We stepped into the open kitchen where Trevor was laying plates on the table. He looked up, a flicker of unease in his eyes before his lips curved into a smile. Why, good to see you, he said, clasping my hand too tightly, holding on a beat too long. Can I get you a drink? Wine, something stronger. Wine's fine, I murmured, though I barely tasted it when he poured. My eyes never left Ida. She moved around the kitchen with effortless control, efficient and precise, the same way she managed board meetings. Everything about her screamed composure, the poise of someone holding all the cards. Then, like a sudden shaft of sunlight, Sophie bounded in, paint-stained overalls, hair, in a wild halo, eyes wide with excitement. Grandpa I bent down, scooping her up with ease, holding her close. She smelled of crayons and soap, a reminder of innocence untouched by the rot seeping through this house. My throat tightened. What's this I hear about a picture? I asked gently. She grinned, thrusting a crayon drawing into my hand. It's us at the office. See, that's you at your big desk. And that's me in the spinning chair. The paper was covered in stick figures and colorful scribbles, but I recognized the Hansen Tech logo colors she'd tried to mimic. My vision blurred for a second, not from age, but from emotion I couldn't afford to show. It's beautiful, sweetheart, I said, kissing her forehead. Over her shoulder, I caught Ida watching us. For a fleeting instant, something cracked across her expression. Guilt, calculation, something she couldn't quite hide. Then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. Sophie, wash your hands for dinner, Trevor said, his voice pitched a little too bright, too eager to move things along. As Sophie ran off, Ida stirred the pot on the stove, her movements fluid, practiced. Dad, you look tired, she remarked lightly. Maybe you should rest more. The words carried weight, a test, a dagger disguised as concern. I met her eyes, forcing calm into my voice. Work keeps me sharp. By the way, how are things in the finance department? She froze for half a second, wooden spoon halfway to her lips. Then she lowered it. Let's not talk about work at dinner. Since when, I asked softly, tilting my head. You usually love discussing quarterly projections. Not tonight, she said, turning back to the stove. Family time is sacred. Sacred, a word that once meant loyalty, honesty, love. Now it was just another weapon she wielded, polished smooth. Trevor cleared his throat. Sophie drew that picture during her art time today. She's been talking about visiting the office again. Maybe next week, I answered, the words catching in my throat. If I still have an office next week. Sophie came running back, climbing into her booster seat with a giggle. Her joy filled the room, But for me, the house felt colder than the rain-soaked streets outside. Dinner had just begun, but already I knew this wasn't a family table anymore. It was a battlefield. "Grandpa, can you tell the story about the first computer?" Her voice was innocent, curious, bright. Sophie leaned forward, eyes shining with that unfiltered wonder children carry so easily. "Which story, sweetheart?" I asked, smiling, despite the weight pressing down on me. "The one when you built the company in the garage." Her words pulled me backward through time. Out of the corner of my eye, I glanced at Ida. She was slicing chicken with the precision of a surgeon, deliberate, careful, controlled. Not a flicker of emotion touched her face. "That was before your mommy was born." I began, slowly letting the memory roll through me like an old film reel. "We had nothing but ideas, determination, and a couple of second-hand parts. The garage was freezing in winter, boiling in summer. But we had dreams bigger than the walls around us." "And Grandma Elna helped," Sophie added brightly. The knife paused mid-slice. For just a second, Ida's shoulders tightened, a tremor breaking through her mask. "Yes," I said softly, my throat tightening. "Grandma Elna helped with everything. She believed in me when no one else did. She was the foundation." A silence stretched across the table, heavy, almost unbearable. Trevor reached for the remote, filling the void with safe, neutral, classical music. The strings were too polished, too rehearsed, like the conversation that followed. Dinner unfolded with an air of artificial normalcy. Sophie chattered about preschool, her friends, her crayons, the class pet rabbit. Trevor launched into a careful description of his latest architectural project, his tone too bright, too eager to divert. And Ida, my daughter, asked polite, measured questions about my health, my sleep, whether I was eating properly. Every word from her lips felt less like concern and more like reconnaissance. "The chicken is excellent," I offered, needing to pierce the silence with something normal. "Mom's recipe," Ida replied. Her voice carried a subtle edge, sharp enough to draw blood if I wasn't careful. "She always said cooking was about love, not perfection." Another loaded statement. My late wife had indeed said that often, usually when trying to pull me away from endless hours at the office. She was right, of course. She was wise about many things. "Yes," I said softly, staring at my plate. She was. Ida's fork clicked against porcelain, deliberate, final. She understood priorities. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Unspoken, undeniable. Sophie looked from her mother to me, sensing the undercurrent, no matter how hard we masked it. "Grandpa, why are you sad? Out of the mouths of babes." "I'm not sad, sweetheart," I said gently, forcing a smile. "Just thinking. About what I swallowed hard. About how much I love our family dinners." Across the table, Ida's eyes locked with mine. For a fleeting second, I didn't see the woman cutting me out of my own life's work. I saw the little girl who once waited by the window every night for me to come home, who used to run into my arms as though nothing else in the world mattered. But like smoke in the rain, the image vanished. "More wine?" Trevor asked quickly, already reaching for the bottle, eager to cover the tension with hospitality. The evening crawled forward. Dessert, coffee, Sophie showing me her drawings. The rituals of a family evening played out on the stage of betrayal. Every smile, every word, another mask. At 8:15, I rose from the table. "Thank you for dinner," I said. My voice felt distant, hollow. As always, it was perfect. Ida walked me to the door. "Dad, are you sure you're okay? You seem different tonight." I studied her face carefully. The concern looked genuine. Perhaps it was, or perhaps she'd convinced herself that what she was doing was for my own good. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, forcing warmth into my tone. "Just reflecting, thinking about how much Hanson means to me and to our family." Something shifted in her expression, just for a heartbeat. Her guard shot back up, the mask returned. "Drive safely," she said. "The roads are slick tonight." I kissed her cheek. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean into it either. "Good night, Ida." "Good night, Dad." The door closed behind me with a soft click. I stood there on her front steps as rain began to fall again, cold drops pattering against my coat. Through the window, I watched her clearing the dishes with mechanical precision, every movement efficient, controlled, methodical, planning my destruction one measured step at a time. Later, I parked overlooking Lake Union. The city's lights shimmered across the black water, broken by ripples that seemed to mirror the chaos inside me. My hands shook as I picked up the phone and dialed Michael. Why? He answered immediately. How did dinner go? Like a performance, I said bitterly. Rain drummed on the windshield like a funeral march. She knows how to act concerned while stabbing me in the back. Tell me everything. She's been preparing for 6 months, I said. She has records of supposed emotional outbursts at meetings. What outbursts? I slammed a fist against the wheel. I've always controlled myself. Michael's voice was calm, steady. The Anderson acquisition. When you rejected their lowball offer, apparently you raised your voice. She documented it as irrational, as anger that threatened company relationships. I closed my eyes. I remembered that meeting clearly. I hadn't been angry, I'd been passionate. There was a difference. But in her version, passion had been recast as instability. What else? I whispered. Financial decisions, Michael said. She's building a case line by line. The rain grew heavier, the drops streaming down the windshield like tears I still refused to shed. She's labeled your choices as sentiment over strategy. Michael's voice was steady, but the weight of his words pressed down on me like lead. The charity partnership with Elena's foundation, the employee retention program initiatives that cost money but didn't bring immediate profit. My throat tightened. Those were good decisions, I said, my voice breaking on the last word. They were good decisions. Partnerships that gave back to the community. Programs that kept loyal employees from burning out or leaving. They had value that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. I know, Michael said gently, but she's framing them as emotional indulgences rather than business logic. Choices of the heart instead of the mind. The steering wheel was cold beneath my hands as I started the engine. The vibration of the car, the only thing tethering me to the present. What's her timeline? Hearing is scheduled for next Friday. If she wins, she gets temporary control while you undergo a psychological evaluation. And if I refuse, then the shareholders can vote you out anyway. She has enough backing now. The words rang in my ears like a death sentence. I drove through the nearly deserted streets of Seattle, neon lights reflecting on the rain-slick pavement, my thoughts a chaotic blur. She wasn't just challenging me. She was dismantling everything I had built piece by piece, brick by brick, with surgical precision. By the time I got home, exhaustion weighed on me like chains. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing in the silence of the house. My study welcomed me with its familiar scent of polished wood and old books. 30 years of memories lined the walls, awards, photos, artifacts of a life measured in achievements. Proof of everything I had built, everything I had sacrificed for. I opened the safe and pulled out a worn bundle of letters, Elna's letters written during her final months. Her handwriting, delicate and steady, despite the pain she must have been in, reached across time to pierce me. We need your attention more than the company does. She thinks you don't love her. I had dismissed those words back then. Ida was thriving, successful, independent. How could she doubt my love? But Elna had seen deeper. She had seen what I couldn't or wouldn't. Now that doubt had festered, hardened into resentment, into betrayal. I pulled down a folder marked EDA, personal. Inside were school records, report cards, photographs from company events where she had stood beside me. Her smile proud, her eyes shining with eagerness. When had that pride soured? When had it curdled into something darker? The quiet was broken by a chime from my computer, an encrypted email from Michael. I opened it and the screen filled with legal documents. Dense, suffocating pages of accusations and medical recommendations. Subject displays increasing emotional volatility and attachment to outdated business practices. His refusal to embrace modern corporate strategies suggests diminished cognitive flexibility consistent with early-stage dementia or depression following spousal loss. My chest tightened. Depression following spousal loss. They were using Elna's death against me. My grief, my love, weaponized as evidence of incompetence. I poured 3 fingers of scotch, the amber liquid burning a path down my throat, but it did nothing to dull the ache. The complaint listed character witnesses ready to testify about my supposed decline. Financial analysts prepared to argue that my decisions had been driven by emotion, not reason. Medical experts who would stand in front of a judge and insist I needed compassionate intervention. A full-scale character assassination wrapped neatly in concern for my well-being. The brilliance of the strategy was undeniable, and that brilliance cut deeper than any knife. By 1 a.m., I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness. Rain tapped relentlessly against the windows, a cold and constant reminder that the world outside moved on, indifferent to my private collapse. The house felt enormous, cavernous, empty in a way it hadn't since Elna's passing. Her photograph sat on my desk, her eyes kind, knowing, watching me even now. She had known this day might come. She had tried to warn me. She doesn't understand why you love the company more than her. But she was wrong. I never loved the company more. I built it for her, for our daughter, for our family's future. Every late night, every missed dinner, every sacrifice was my way of loving them in the only language I knew: ambition, security, legacy. But somehow, somewhere I had failed to translate that love, failed to show Ida what it truly meant. Now she was speaking a different language, the cold, ruthless language of corporate warfare, and she had learned it well, too well. I sat there in the shadows, the rain blurring the city lights outside, knowing one truth with painful clarity. Next Friday, it wouldn't just be my company on trial. It would be me, my life, my choices, my very identity as a father, and it was my own daughter who would be the executioner. I opened my phone and began typing furiously, my fingers trembling with the weight of both betrayal and determination. Names of allies, potential strategies, lines of defense, every thought became a weapon forged in urgency. I wasn't just making notes. I was drafting a battle plan. If Ida wanted a war, she would have one. She had mistaken my grief for weakness, my silence for surrender. But she had forgotten one thing: I hadn't built Hansen by yielding to superior forces. I had built it by outthinking them, by refusing to bend even when the storm howled loudest. The night outside pressed heavy against the windows, but inside me something had shifted. It wasn't only anger nor just hurt, it was purpose. A cold, clear sense of strategy pulsed through me. My own daughter had declared war not only on me, but on the very empire I had poured my life into. She thought she knew how to fight, but it was I who had taught her every weapon she now wielded. Dawn was still hours away when I rose, briefcase in hand, packed with 2 weeks of carefully collected evidence. No more waiting, no more defense. It was time to strike back. The elevator climbed toward Steve's floor with its usual mechanical precision, but to me it felt like the slow march of a drum before battle. My reflection in the metal doors looked older, wearier, but also sharper than it had in years. I would not be the man who was quietly erased. Steve Wilson's corner office was 3 floors down from mine, the same panoramic view of Lake Union spreading like glass across the night. Yet Steve had always seen the world differently. His assistant gave me a quick nod. "He's expecting you, Mr. Hansen." I pushed the door open. Steve looked up from a stack of quarterly projections, reading glasses slipping down his nose. 60 years of friendship lived in those familiar blue eyes: boyhood adventures, first business pitches, triumphs, funerals. "Why?" he said warmly. "Perfect timing." "I was just reviewing. We need to talk." I cut in, my voice sharper than I intended. I set the briefcase on his conference table with a deliberate thud that echoed in the room. "Close the door." Something in my tone made him obey instantly. The click of the lock sounded like the sealing of fate. "What's wrong?" he asked, scanning my face. "Ida." I said, each syllable weighted like iron. "She's trying to have me declared incompetent." Steve's face shifted through confusion, disbelief, and finally a heavy sorrow. "That's impossible." I opened the briefcase. Legal documents spilled across the polished wood like battle maps unfurled before generals. "Not impossible," I said grimly. "Already in motion." "She filed 2 weeks ago. She wants temporary control while I undergo psychological evaluation." Steve sank back into his chair, his voice a whisper now. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I had to understand the battlefield before I called in reinforcements," I replied. I pulled out the shareholder analysis, every name and loyalty marked like territories on a war chart: green for loyal, red for those Ida had already turned yellow for undecided. Steve's eyes narrowed. "Too much red." "Corbin's already committed," I said. "So is Patricia Wheeler." 3 more leaning her way. Steve scanned the papers, shaking his head. "Why?" "She promised Corbin a 15% dividend increase. Based on what? Staff cuts. Automation. AI. His voice was bitter. A cold weight settled in my chest. That would gut the company, destroy the culture we've built for 30 years. Steve's jaw tightened. The young shareholders don't care about culture. They care about numbers, about quick returns. She's telling them exactly what they want to hear. He turned to his computer, pulling up intercepted communications perks of being co-founder with legacy access to internal systems. What I saw on the screen made my stomach twist. Ada had been systematic calculated. Each shareholder was courted with promises crafted to their deepest desires. Corbin had profit projections. Wheeler had efficiency reports. Others received gleaming presentations on modernization and AI. She's selling them a fantasy. I muttered, my voice low and dangerous. Steve leaned back, his expression grim. A profitable fantasy. I spread financial reports across the table pages, fanning out like evidence of a different truth. Real performance, steady growth, healthy profit margins, employee satisfaction ratings that were the envy of our competitors. Proof that Hansen was strong because we had built it with care, with people at its heart. This, I said, tapping the reports is reality. What she's offering is a mirage that will burn this company to ash. The office went silent except for the hum of the city outside. Steve's gaze met mine, and in it I saw the weight of decades, the triumphs we'd earned, the sacrifices we'd made. The stakes had never been higher. She thinks she can beat you at your own game, he said quietly. She's forgotten, I replied, my voice steel, who taught her how to play. We've averaged 12% annual growth, toi noi, yong tram, shuang hu, mun dan man, tung kon, so. Tilig yu chan han bien la, chin moi bon fantram. Jim hai long kach hang jang dan jaon gan. Jolatan tu tukte, jog shai dong bang mo hoi sukien trivan, nhang kon nang goy trung tan. Then hang ko ay lai hua hen hai moi lam fantram tang trong shibang. Tai kao truk chin lok. Toin han man kum tu ay jeroi nginovang bong trong jao min, numotsun haubang. Tai kao truk chin lok. Ngeti sang trong hang tak chat, chila kam tu bong bay chuviekfa. Nat kuk joy hang drem han vien sho abovan, hua ma shung toi jamat ba moinam gay dung. Toi nangang len, kon Corbin ong ay jamat hoan toan shua Steve dua han bao ke joy mat an, lentia janjo, chua han. Corbin ton trong su on jin lao dai, nung ong ta jang lo sobi, bolai fi asao. Lo soselo chuyen tao kong nghe kitiep, vai thi shong ta, nhach ong ta, nho toi jab jai mo tapos of fi Steve. Nhach ong ta, nho gio gisik saira voin Hong Kong ti lao teo moi tralu. Jai toi motap tai leo lat nhan vai trang. Nhung kong ti jon chon shen log yong hetida. Nhung logo quen tuok hien ragio chikon la kai bong kuachen min. Techflow Industries. Tu jong hoa to andien. Gopfiutang gap batrong hainam. Steve got jao net matronen nangne. Roy dich vu kach hang sup jo. Chinusak. Gio ho chikon bang hai muay fantram sovoy jin. Jola by hok song jong chobat, guai mu quang she theo ao vong loin huan. Trong mot gio tiep theo shung toi lao vao vashke hoach. Tung kai tenko jong joa koan jo shan bang. Tung bang shung joa ken hach kon so now ju manj je thu yet fuk gok ni nao ko, the show I shu yen tindi. Moi buak ji o juak jatra nhur mot nuak ko. Ben nangoai kon muak zam seat through the Kshuong, Seattle quad, Vaun hung o king lon hon heptrong, tuk gio. Tang hai bao troinang triu. Huan hao sho mot kuak chen langlen hung kok lit. Son mot shuyen nua Steve noi, giong hatap nuso tongwach ngejuak. Luat sukua eda. Laura Blake, Toin heo mat. Michael Jambao. Kota noi ting. Gai ap luk trong fong shun hu, dien kik bien katua en ten san kao. Jung. Kota lake kong nen koi thong. Toin hesh moi kong han la nukoi mala mot loithash tuks. Veithita sho kota mot vo dien hai hon. Mai tin kui Steve Vang len tieng shong, baulich hop hoi jong kwan tritwantwe. Mot boy hop thuong ki ben thuong si shoai kwan dubao kui. Nung la nei no se la chien trong. Kuai sera John o jo toi noi giong shak ni. Tru ki, shung taratai troak. Toi kep shek kaptan hang ban je lai tuam botai lio bai la liet tren ban ho shien jomorong. Bang chung hu hin cho kuak fan kong. Sap sap mod boy gaprieng wo Corbin toira len. Trong tuan nai, Buatrua Noi Tronglap, Steve Gad Jiao, Mortens Downtown, Thu Nam, Ong Isik Hong Tu Choi, An Sang Monhat Ngoai Kung Kwe Bao Hiu Chiu Jang Buong, Chi Trong Het Ying Jong Ho To Jan Chu Yen Min Tu Mot Kebi, Het Han Mot Vituong. Kon Gai Toi Mun Chien Tran Ko Isikono. Nhung Ko Ai Kwen Mat Ai Jan De Ko Ai Kach Chien Jiao. Michael Cho Toyotang Hai Mue Ko Columbia Center. Vân Phong Gong Juok Bok Trongo Guva Muida Kukai Mot Tu Kwen Uitwara Tutung Chidiet. Toijen Samoy Fu Chia Kap Nang Triun Hong Tai Liutin Bao Steve Vua Kung Kap. Sa Fei Chutuan Gai Hansen Ko Tiep Tan Hoi. Toi Gat John Leili Giai Nong Hoi. Jai Sela Mot Ngai Dai. Mikel Kshuat Hien Noi Kunkwa. Gung Mat Sek Larnhan Mat Tintao. San Sang Chuchien Tran Chua Pong Hop Kwa Ong Trong Hu Trong Tam Chi Hoi. Mod Buk Tuong Pu Kien Tai Liu Kien Tung Kua Eda. Buk Tuong Joy Dien Treo Kien Bang Chung Fan Kong Kua Chung Toi. Gua Hai Buk Huang Trong Men Mong Mo Chien Truong Cho Lap Jai Chien Lok. Cho Toi Tai Tat Ka Toi Noi. Mikel Jat Mot Tap Ho Sodai Kop Shuang Ben. Jai La Ben Jetrin Chin Tuk. Bun Moi Bai Treng. Moi Kao Buok Juok Viet Hun Hat Dao Moi Bang Chung Hu Lop Moi Sat Timbao Vet Thuong. Toilet Tung Trang. Moi Kuyet Jin Toi Tung Tu Haun Hung Du An Han Jaun Hong Kwan. Zhao Tu Vao Konangoi Vao Long Trung. Ten Tat Kebi So Ai Shu in them Bang Chung Shu. Su Batong Kam Su. Moi Buk Ji Mao Him Juok Tai Jin He. Ten Dao Hiu Sui Gem Han Thug. Jo Hong Kon La Mot Vu Kien. Nola Mot Kwok Hang Quiet Ko He Thong. She claims you've lost touch with market reality. Michael's voice was calm, but the words cut sharper than any blade. I clenched my jaw. Lost touch with reality. Our profits had grown 12% last year alone. Steady and clean growth that came from discipline, loyalty, and foresight. Yet in Ida's narrative, that success wasn't mine. No, she had already begun rewriting history, painting herself as the sole architect, the visionary hero, swooping in to save her father's crumbling empire. Classic, I muttered bitterly, rewriting history with herself at the center. Michael didn't disagree. Instead, he slid another stack of papers across the table, the folder heavy with ink and accusation. Her evidence, he said quietly. I opened it. 6 months' worth of carefully documented slander notes of meetings where I had supposedly shown inappropriate emotional responses, financial decisions reframed as sentimental indulgences rather than strategic moves. Every bold step I had taken, our acquisition of Anderson, the partnership with Elena's foundation, the employee retention program that had cut turnover to record lows, each one of them profitable, smart, and forward-thinking. Yet here on these sterile pages, they were twisted into proof of weakness, not leadership but decline, not vision but frailty. And then came the name I already dreaded, Laura Blake. Michael's face darkened as he said it, his tone edged with respect and disdain all at once. 38 wins and 42 competency hearings. She's ruthless. Family business disputes are her specialty. She knows how to turn a loving father into a senile patriarch in front of 12 strangers. I stared at the photograph glowing on his computer screen, sharp cheekbones, a predator's smile, eyes that gleamed with the thrill of destruction. Laura Blake, the woman who had built a career tearing legacies apart in courtrooms, leaving behind fractured families and broken empires. My stomach tightened. Ida had chosen well. Too well. She turns hearings into theater, Michael continued. Then we write a better script. I said, voice low, steady. That was when he opened our own playbook. Defense strategies, character witnesses, decades of financial records, medical evaluations, all designed to prove not just competence, but clarity, strength, and stability. I've scheduled cognitive assessments with 3 independent specialists. Michael said, ticking them off like weapons on an inventory list. Neurological testing, psychological evaluation, full physical, blood work, everything. Overkill? I asked. Necessary, he replied flatly. She'll probe every angle. Age, grief, memory, temperament. If you stumble even once, she'll make it look like collapse. The irony was acid in my mouth. At 62, I was sharper, faster, more alive than men half my age who were already slipping into mediocrity. But Ida had weaponized the one wound she knew would still bleed Elena. She's claiming delayed trauma response, Michael explained, that after Elena's death, your judgment deteriorated. That grief impaired your ability to lead, made you volatile. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Elena's face rose in my mind, her laughter, her steadiness, her faith in me. To see her memory twisted into a weapon against me, to watch my daughter use her mother's absence as a dagger, it was almost unthinkable. Almost, but not quite. I closed the file with deliberate care. What's our counter? That was when Michael smiled, the first flicker of light all morning. He spread out another set of documents, the ink still sharp from the printer. Ida's own words, her unrealistic promises, her secret campaign to shareholders all lined up like dominoes. We turn her greatest strength into her downfall, he said. Her projections are fantasy. We file for breach of fiduciary duty, conspiracy to defraud shareholders, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. That last one lingered in the air between us. It was personal, and we both knew it. Will it work? I asked. It'll force her onto defense? She'll have to justify her actions instead of just attacking yours. Michael slid the countersuit across the table. 23 pages of legal firepower accusations wrapped in polished corporate language. My pen hovered only a second before I signed the ink, flowing smooth and certain. No tremor in my hand, no doubt, only resolve. She'll be furious, Michael said. Good, I replied coldly. Angry people make mistakes. Outside, the rain had thickened into sleet, slamming against the glass in relentless rhythm. Seattle in February, gray skies, frozen streets, perfect weather for war. One more thing, Michael added. The hearing date, March 15th. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Enough time to prepare if we move fast. Not much margin for error, but enough for me. A knock at the door broke the silence. Michael's assistant poked her head in. Excuse me, Mr. Hanson. Mr. Wilson is here for the 11:30 appointment. Steve entered, his own briefcase in hand, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the documents spread across the polished table. War maps, battle plans, betrayals laid bare. The battlefield was set, and the fight for everything I had built, everything I was, had officially begun. The alliance was expanding. Gentlemen, Steve said, his voice steady, resolute. We're here to save our company. The three of us stood around the conference table, the mahogany surface polished to perfection, yet now scarred by the weight of betrayal spread across it. Evidence, documents, photos, timelines, each one, another reminder that this wasn't merely business anymore. This was blood, family. Ida wanted to play legal games. I said, my voice low but sharp as glass. Now she gets to learn the rules. Outside, Seattle's skyline had vanished into the thick gray mist that rolled in from the sound. The city looked blurred, uncertain, but inside this room, clarity crystallized like steel. The war was no longer metaphorical, it had been declared. Positions chosen, strategies drafted. Now it was time for the most painful step, to remind my own daughter, who had taught her how to fight in the first place. I arrived 15 minutes early for the meeting, taking a table by the window that overlooked the Pike Place market below. March in Seattle was always a negotiation between winter's grip and spring's fragile promise. Vendors shouted prices for fresh tulips, early daffodils, salmon hauled in at dawn. The air outside smelled faintly of salt and rain, but my coffee was bitter black. It suited the occasion. She arrived at exactly 2:15. Etta had always been punctual, another inheritance from me, though she would never admit it. Dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, she looked every inch the corporate warrior she'd fashioned herself into. Her eyes scanned the cafe, first calculating exits, counting witnesses, as though this were a battlefield and not just a father-daughter lunch. Dad. She sat across from me, placing her bag carefully beside her chair, her body angled for distance. Thank you for coming. Your message said it was important. I studied her face. Thinner than last time. Tired. Her skin was pale, the corners of her mouth tight with strain. Carrying the weight of deception wasn't easy, not even for her. How's Sophie? I asked quietly. Fine. She didn't hesitate. She's been asking about you. The words carried more than casual observation, they carried accusation. I was the absent grandfather, the workaholic father, the man who always chose quarterly earnings and board meetings over bedtime stories and birthdays. And Trevor, I asked, busy with his projects. Her tone was carefully neutral, deliberately flat. We circled each other with words, two combatants testing defenses before the real engagement. Ida. I leaned forward slightly. Why didn't you come to me directly? Something flickered in her expression, a split second of surprise, perhaps. Guilt, but it was gone as quickly as it came. About what she said smoothly, still maintaining the lie. About your concerns, your ideas for the company, your plans. Her shoulders stiffened. When I tried, you were always busy with the company. And there it was. The truth she had been waiting years to unload. I built this for you, I said, my voice tightening. Her laugh was short, bitter cutting. No, Dad. You built it for yourself. I was just an accessory, a name you could point to when people asked about family legacy. The accusation landed like a physical blow. My chest felt heavy as if each word had weight. That's not true, I whispered. But wasn't it? She leaned forward now, her anger breaking through the mask of composure she'd worn since walking in. Every family dinner interrupted by business calls. Every vacation cut short because of some meeting you just had to attend. Every school play you missed. Every milestone you skipped because Hansen Tech mattered more. The memories poured in uninvited Elena's disappointed eyes at the dinner table. The way Ida had smiled bravely at her college graduation while glancing toward the empty seat that should have been mine. I was providing for our family, I said, my throat dry. You were feeding your ego. The silence that followed was crushing. Outside the market, vendors kept calling prices. Tourists laughed and bargained. Life continued as usual, while inside this cafe, 35 years of unspoken resentment and grief hung between us like smoke. She broke the silence first. I want to modernize the company, Dad. I want to drag it into the future, but every initiative I bring forward, you block. And I want to preserve what works, I countered. What works? Her voice rose sharp enough to turn nearby heads. We're falling behind. Other tech companies are outpacing us, overtaking us. Our systems are ancient. Our methods, your methods, are fossils. I shook my head. Our methods built something lasting, something dying. She pulled out her phone and slid it across the table. Charts, graphs, projections, all cold numbers, screaming the same narrative. Hansen Tech was a dinosaur lumbering toward extinction. Automation can increase efficiency by 40%. AI can cut operational costs in half. Remote work can expand our global talent pool. She paused deliberately. And it would eliminate half our workforce in the process. I finished the thought for her, my voice flat. Restructured. You mean destroyed. Families. Livelihoods. People who gave us decades of loyalty. Her jaw tightened, her eyes hard. She didn't deny it. And in that silence, I realized the daughter I had raised to fight had become my fiercest opponent. Business isn't about loyalty, Dad. It's about results. Ida's words fell into the silence like a blade of ice. They hung there, suspended between us, sharp and merciless. I searched her eyes for the warmth I once knew, but all I found was frost. When did you become this cold? I asked, my voice low, heavy with pain and disbelief. When I realized emotions don't pay dividends, she answered, clipped and razor sharp, as if she had rehearsed it 100 times in the mirror. In that instant, the distance between us became infinite. This wasn't the little girl who used to sit by the window, waiting for me to come home from long trips, clutching the airport teddy bear I'd bought in haste. This wasn't the child who once shouted, "Daddy's here," from the bleachers at school. The woman standing before me was someone else entirely calculating, steely, unrecognizable. Who taught you that? I asked, softly, desperate for some crack in the armor she had built around herself. Etta looked straight at me. Her eyes, Elena's eyes, burned with accusation. From you. Every time you chose the company over family. Every time you proved success mattered more than people. Something shattered inside my chest. Not anger, not betrayal, just the raw weight of truth. You never meant a lot of things. She cut me off, as precise as a gavel strike. But intentions don't change outcomes, do they? She gathered her phone and bag with rehearsed efficiency. I reached for her with my voice. Etta, wait. She rose. For a fleeting second, Elena's gaze looked down at me from the face of my daughter. I'm not the little girl waiting by the window anymore. I don't need your approval. I don't need your permission. And I don't need your company. I steadied my voice. But you still want it. I want to save it from you. Her words were iron. The click of her heels echoed like a drumbeat against my ribs. At the door she paused, turned back, and spoke softer, though still distant. "Send Sophie your love." Then she was gone, swallowed by the current of the marketplace, leaving me alone with a cup of cold coffee and a truth colder still. My daughter wasn't just taking the company. She was taking my life's work, my memories, and the emotional debt of 35 years. Worst of all, she might have been right. The next morning, the courthouse steps were slick with Seattle's early rain. I climbed slowly, briefcase heavy in my hand. Across the way, Ida's legal team stood assembled predators in tailored suits. At their center was Laura Blake, her gray suit sharp as steel, her eyes colder still. A woman who had built her career dismantling dynasties. Ida stood poised in navy, the perfect picture of the devoted daughter protecting the family legacy from a faltering father. She did not look at me. Inside, the courtroom overflowed with shareholders, reporters, attorneys, all waiting for the curtain to rise on our family's unmasking. Michael touched my arm, his voice steady. "Remember, stay calm, answer clearly." The gavel struck. Judge Harrison, 70, silver-haired, a reputation for severity, called the case. Docket 2025-347, Hansen versus Hansen Tech Incorporated. Laura Blake sprang up like a cobra. Her voice dripped with honey but carried venom. "Your Honor, this case concerns a CEO whose judgment has been eroded by grief and stubbornness." She prowled the floor with theatrical precision, gesturing lightly toward the jury. "Mr. Hansen can no longer make rational decisions. His emotional attachment to outdated practices threatens shareholder value and employee safety." Behind her, the screen lit up documents. Financial charts, board minutes, evidence woven together with ruthless care over 6 months. Laura lowered her voice for the kill. "The plaintiff, Ms. Ida Hansen Miller, petitions this court for temporary guardianship to protect the company her father built from the decline of his own competence." I sat in silence, my heart pounding, and I knew with a clarity that cut to the bone this battle was never just about a company. It was about memory, about legacy, about whether the bond between father and daughter could survive a war fought in the language of law. Blake's voice spread through the courtroom like honey laced with poison. Smooth, persuasive, deadly, every word glided forth like a blade wrapped in silk. I sat frozen, my heart pounding, as my daughter stepped onto the witness stand. "Ida, my brilliant, ambitious daughter, once my greatest pride, now sworn under oath, prepared to use her own mind and pen to destroy her father." Ms. Hansen Miller Blake began, lowering her voice soft as a caress. "Please describe your father's recent behavior." Ida sat tall, her gaze icy, her voice steady. "My father is driven by emotion, not by business logic. He makes decisions based on personal feelings rather than financial data." Each word pierced my chest like an arrow. She spoke of me as though I were nothing more than a faulty report, a disposable variable. "Could you give a specific example?" Ida nodded lightly. "His charitable partnership with my mother's foundation. It drains $200,000 annually without measurable return. When I suggested reallocating the funds, he became agitated. Agitated. With a single word, the memory of Elena, my wife, the love of my life, was reduced to a line item on a balance sheet." Blake seized the opening, pressing forward. "And what about strategic planning?" Ida didn't hesitate. "He refuses to consider automation or AI integration. He insists it would destroy company culture. Meanwhile, our competitors are surging ahead, capturing market share by embracing innovation. And how has that impacted the company's performance?" "We're stagnating," Ida said coldly. "Growth is slowing. Our performance metrics lag behind industry standards." I gripped the arm of my chair. What she said wasn't entirely false, but it wasn't the whole truth either. We weren't falling behind, we were being careful, sustainable. Our employees stayed because we treated them like people, not numbers waiting to be replaced. Blake smiled, pouncing. "So in your professional opinion, what does the company need?" Ida lifted her chin, unflinching. "New leadership, a modern strategy, a focus on profit, not sentiment." Her words fell on me like a hammer blow. This wasn't the little girl who once lit up at the sound of my keys turning in the door. This was a stranger. Michael, my attorney, rose. His tone was sharp, every question a scalpel. "Ms. Hansen Miller, what was Hansen Tech's profit margin last quarter?" 12%, Ida answered quickly. And the quarter before that, 11.7%. Michael nodded. So under your father's so-called incompetent leadership, profits are still rising. Ada hesitated, if only for a moment. Short-term fluctuations don't reflect long-term sustainability, Michael pressed on. And the employee retention rate, 94% annually. Michael's lips curved into a faint smile as he turned toward the jury. While the industry average is, Ada faltered, near 67%. So your father has maintained significantly higher employee satisfaction than the industry while profits continue to grow. Wouldn't that qualify as effective leadership? Blake shot to her feet. Objection sustained. The judge rapped his gavel, but the damage was already done. Michael's words had taken root. The trial pressed on with new witnesses. James Corbin, a major shareholder, took the stand. We need leadership that prioritizes shareholder interests. Ms. Hanson Miller understands modern business realities better than her father. By the time the morning session ended, I felt as though I had endured a war. Sitting there listening to my own daughter dissect my competence in front of strangers, I clung to composure by sheer will. Memories flooded back, unfinished dinners, canceled vacations, missed school plays. And now every failure had become evidence against me. Michael leaned close, his voice firm. Phase 1 is over. Tomorrow it's our turn. Outside, Seattle's spring rain fell steadily, drumming against the pavement. Eda passed me, flanked by her cold-faced legal team. She didn't spare me a single glance. Once she had been the child who waited for her father to come home. Now she wished only that I would disappear. That afternoon, Sarah, my loyal assistant, tapped lightly at my door. Mr. Hanson, there's something you need to see. She set a folder on my desk, its cover stamped, Employee Communications Confidential. Her expression was heavy. Ada has been holding private meetings. She's promising salary increases that would bankrupt the company. I opened the file. Notes from meetings, email, transcripts, internal exchanges, spanning 6 weeks. She had pledged 20% raises for all engineers, 30% for department heads. She had even promised stock options that didn't exist. I sat in silence, my chest burning with equal parts grief and fury. This wasn't just a lawsuit. It was war. And somehow my daughter had chosen to fight on the enemy's side. Where did you get this? I asked, my voice rougher than I intended, the papers trembling slightly in my hand. Sarah didn't flinch. Her gaze was steady, though I saw the weight behind her eyes. People talk, Mr. Hanson, especially when promises sound too good to be true. I stared down at the documents again, my stomach tightening with every line I read. The ink on the page felt heavier than lead. The conference room door opened and Steve Wilson entered, his usual calm demeanor, replaced by a shadow of concern. He glanced at Sarah, then at me, and I already knew what was coming before he spoke. We have a problem, why? He dropped his briefcase onto the table with a thud that echoed through the room louder than it should have been. From inside, he pulled a thick stack of printed emails. His jaw was clenched, his eyes dark. Ada is courting new shareholders, pension funds, investment groups, anyone with money and appetite for risk. She's painting you as a relic, an obstacle standing in the way of explosive growth. The words cut deeper than the emails already had. My daughter, my blood was selling me off like a piece of outdated machinery. Steve slid the pages toward me. She's making promises she can't possibly deliver. 20% salary increases for employees, 30% for department heads, stock options that don't exist, and she claims it'll all be funded by automation. I scanned the numbers, the projections, the wild claims. None of it made sense. Even with full automation, something I had resisted for the sake of our people, the savings would never touch those figures. The mathematics weren't just flawed, they were impossible. She's committing fraud, I whispered, the word tasting like ash. Steve's lips twisted in something too bitter to be called a smile. It gets better. He powered up his laptop, the glow of the screen casting sharp shadows across the table. I've been monitoring internal communications. I found something interesting about her lawyer. A face appeared on the screen. Laura Blake. Perfectly composed professional headshot, sharp features softened only by studio lighting. But the headline beneath the photo told another story. Sanctioned by the Bar Association 2 years ago, Steve read aloud, for suborning perjury in a corporate case, Suspended from practice temporarily. Before I could process the revelation, my phone rang. Michael's number lit up the screen. "Why?" he said the moment I answered, his voice urgent. "I have evidence Blake violated ethical standards. Serious violations." My hand tightened on the phone. "What kind of evidence?" "She coached Ida's testimony," Michael replied. "Word for word. Told her exactly how to phrase her accusations, how to make her performance convincing. That's witness tampering." The room seemed to tilt for a moment. The courtroom scene replayed in my head, Ida's calm certainty, her polished answers, the rehearsed cadence. It hadn't been confidence. It had been a script. Michael's voice hardened. More importantly, I dug deeper. I found financial irregularities in Ida's account management. Ice filled my chest. What irregularities? Transfers. 3 separate occasions. A total of $847,000, all without your consent. The number hit me like a physical blow. My knees felt weak, but I forced myself upright. For what? Legal fees, consultant payments, campaign expenses for her takeover bid. I looked at Steve. His eyes confirmed what I feared he hadn't known either. This was new. This was devastating. "That's embezzlement," I said, my voice hollow. "Technically unauthorized use of corporate funds," Michael corrected. "But yes, it's criminal behavior." Steve leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "This changes everything. We're not just defending your leadership anymore. We have grounds to dismantle her entire case." The irony struck me like a cruel joke. My daughter had set out to prove I was incompetent, but in doing so, she had revealed her own reckless arrogance, her own criminal stupidity. I walked to the window, Seattle's skyline stretching before me in the gray light. This city had been my proving ground, my battlefield, my home. I had built everything here, my company, my family, my marriage. And now within these same streets, my daughter was trying to bury it all. "Elena," I whispered to the sky. "What happened to our little girl, Michael?" I said at last, my voice firm again. "How do we present this?" "Carefully," he replied. "We don't want to look vindictive. We want to look competent, measured, professional. The evidence speaks for itself. In Blake's history, I'll file a formal complaint with the bar. Simultaneously, we present her misconduct to the judge." Behind me, Steve had already spread the documents across the conference table: financial records, internal memos, transcripts of secret meetings, a trail of betrayal laid bare in black and white. "The question is timing," I said. "The next hearing is Monday. Blake will be ready to hammer us on defense again. This time we attack." Silence fell over the room as I studied the spread of papers, the proof of 6 months of lies against the foundation of 30 years of truth. "Schedule a meeting with our character witnesses," I ordered. "I want them prepared for the most brutal cross-examination Blake can throw." Steve nodded. "Already done. Patricia from accounting, David from engineering. They'll testify. Good people, loyal people, people who knew the company's real story." As I looked at the evidence, a strange calm settled over me. Lies could win moments, but truth endured. And soon, very soon, the truth would have its day. They would testify to my competence and to her deceptions. But Michael's question lingered in the air. What about the employees she had promised the impossible to? Steve answered with his usual precision. "Most of them are bewildered. They trusted her. They wanted to believe. But the numbers don't add up, and now they're beginning to realize it." I leaned back, watching the afternoon sunlight filter through the tall windows of my office. Seattle in April had a way of surprising you. After days of relentless gray, the sky would suddenly split open, pouring gold onto the streets and rooftops. For a moment, the city almost seemed to forgive itself for its constant rain. "I'll head home early," I finally said, my voice quieter than I intended. "We'll plan our presentation tonight." Steve gathered his documents into a neat pile, his movements sharp, efficient. "We've got enough ammunition to sink a battleship. Let's just hope we can aim it accurately." When they left, the silence didn't feel hollow anymore. It wasn't the silence of defeat, but of focus, a stillness before the storm. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't weighed down by despair. I was sharpened. Tomorrow, we would remind everyone in that courtroom who had built Hansen Tech from the ground up, and why it deserved more than my daughter's reckless ambition. The courthouse felt transformed the next morning. The very air hummed with tension like static before a lightning strike. Every seat was filled, employees, journalists, curious onlookers. Ada sat with Blake, her posture perfectly composed, her chin lifted with the same confidence she had worn during their last triumph. They didn't know what was waiting for them. Judge Harrison entered, robe, flowing gavel, cracking like thunder. Court is now in session. Mr. Reed, you may proceed with additional evidence. Michael rose deliberately, each movement controlled predatory. Your Honor, during discovery, we identified unauthorized financial operations conducted by the plaintiff. Blake shot to her feet. Objection. This is beyond the scope of overruled, the judge cut in, his voice firm. Continue, Mr. Reed. Michael stepped toward the evidence table as if he were selecting surgical instruments. We have traced 3 separate unauthorized transfers from Hansen Tech's corporate accounts. The total amount, $847,000. The number cracked through the room like ice shattering. A collective gasp rose from the gallery. I turned toward my daughter, her face, usually so poised, had gone pale. The blood seemed to drain from her as the reality struck. These funds, Michael continued, his voice steady, merciless, were used to finance Miss Hansen Miller's legal campaign against her father. These expenditures were made without board approval, without proper documentation, and without authorization of any kind. In other words, Your Honor, embezzlement. The bank statements lit up, the screen dates, amounts, recipient accounts, each one undeniable. Blake was already scrambling, her calm veneer cracking. Your Honor, this is nothing more than a desperate attempt to discredit my client. Desperate? Michael allowed himself a cold smile. Desperate is relying on lies. These, he tapped the screen with a finger, are numbers, and numbers don't lie. He turned then, deliberately, toward Ida. For the first time, she didn't look like an executive. She looked like a cornered animal, trembling as the walls of her carefully constructed illusion closed in around her. And furthermore, Michael added, his voice cutting through the silence, we possess evidence of witness tampering. Blake's composure shattered completely. That's preposterous, she snapped, her voice higher now, thinner. Is it? Michael asked coolly. We have recordings. Ms. Blake coached her client's testimony, fed her specific phrases, emotional cues, and strategic answers. The performance Your Honor witnessed was not natural. It was scripted. The judge leaned forward sharply. Recordings, yes, Michael said. Office security cameras with audio capability. The coaching sessions were inadvertently captured during routine security sweeps. A shadow passed over Judge Harrison's face. I want those recordings reviewed immediately. When my turn came to take the stand, I felt calm. After everything, the storm within me had burned out, leaving only clarity. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and sat tall. Mr. Hansen, Michael began, his tone formal but steady. How long have you managed Hansen Tech? 30 years, I said. I founded the company in 1995 with $50,000 borrowed against my house. I let the number hang there a moment before continuing. Current annual revenue, $247 million. Net profit, $29.6 million. Employee count, nearly 800. Michael nodded, then asked the question he'd prepared carefully. Have you ever been declared incompetent by any medical professional? No, I replied firmly. I underwent a comprehensive evaluation last month. Cognitive function tests, psychological assessments, physical examination. All results were normal for my age. Michael displayed the medical reports on the courtroom screen, clean bills of health from 3 independent doctors. Unassailable proof. Finally, he asked the question that seemed to silence the very room. In your professional opinion, Mr. Hansen, why is your daughter pursuing this legal action? I turned my head slowly to look at Ida. My daughter, my brilliant, ambitious child, who once waited by the window for me to come home from work, who once slipped her tiny hand into mine with blind trust. Now she sat staring at her hands, unable to meet my eyes. And for the first time, I wasn't just angry, I was heartbroken. She believes I've prioritized company culture over maximum profits. I said, my voice steady but edged with something deeper, something that came from 30 years of sacrifice. Her vision is automation, aggressive, cost-cutting, the stripping away of jobs and benefits. To her, numbers on a quarterly report matter more than the people who gave their lives to build this company. Michael leaned closer. Is profit maximization always the correct business strategy? No, I answered firmly. Profit without purpose is poison. Sustainable growth demands balance between profit and people, between the present and the future. You cannot cut the soul out of a company and expect it to thrive. Our employees are not expendable. Our customers are not numbers. Our community is not collateral damage. How has this philosophy affected Hansen Tech's performance? Michael asked. I straightened. 30 years of consistent growth, employee retention that rivals any company in our field, customer satisfaction scores in the 95th percentile, stability, loyalty, endurance. That is what culture delivers. Michael nodded, letting the words settle over the courtroom like stones dropped into still water. You've managed this company for 3 decades. You know every number, every employee, every strategic decision, and yet your daughter seeks to replace that experience with recklessness. I looked directly at Ida. She wants to gamble long-term stability for short-term gains. Blake rose, her tone sharp, her desperation bleeding through. Mr. Hansen, isn't it true that you've resisted modernization? I've resisted reckless change, I replied without hesitation. Technology should serve business goals, not dictate them. Progress is not an excuse for carelessness. Blake's eyes narrowed. Your daughter claims you're emotionally unstable. I drew in a breath. My daughter is young, impatient. She mistakes passion for instability. She mistakes conviction for stubbornness. What she calls sentiment, I call experience. 30 years of building something meant to last. The tension in the room was palpable. Blake's words were sharp, but each one bounced off a wall of truth that the evidence had already built. Every arrow she loosed missed its mark. The courtroom knew it. Ida knew it. When Corbin took the stand again, his bravado was gone. His voice wavered. I may have been overly optimistic about projected returns. Are you still supporting Ms. Hansen Miller's leadership? Bid Michael pressed. A long pause. Corbin swallowed. I'm reconsidering my position. Blake tried one last desperate push in her closing argument. Despite these allegations, the real issue remains Mr. Hansen's refusal to embrace necessary modernization. But Michael rose with surgical calm. No, the core issue is whether a daughter can steal her father's company through lies, through embezzlement, through tampering with witnesses. That is the heart of this case. Judge Harrison's expression was granite, unyielding. Order in the court. His voice carried the weight of finality. Given the serious allegations of financial misconduct and possible ethics violations, this case requires additional review. Ida finally looked at me then. Her eyes, Elna's eyes, were filled with something raw and broken. Fear, confusion, regret. The court will reconvene in 1 week for final decision. As the room emptied, Ida approached slowly, her shoulders hunched as if under the weight of everything she had unleashed. Dad. Her voice was fragile, almost childlike. For a moment I saw not the adversary across the courtroom, but the little girl who once begged me for bedtime stories. I never meant for it to go this far. My throat tightened. But it did, sweetheart. It did. She turned away, retreating with her ruined legal team, leaving me with the wreckage of what had once been our family. Victory felt hollow like ashes in my hands. What was the worth of winning if it meant destroying your own daughter? All rise for the Honorable Judge Harrison. The entire courtroom stood. Shareholders, lawyers, family members who had become strangers. I felt Steve's steady hand on my shoulder as the judge entered, his robes trailing the weight of judgment. He settled behind his bench, every motion deliberate, precise. Please be seated. The silence that followed was absolute. 3 months of family warfare had brought us to this single moment. In the matter of Hansen versus Hansen Tech Incorporated, Judge Harrison said, his voice resonant, final. I have reached my decision. My heart pounded against my ribs. Across the aisle, Ida sat rigid, Laura Blake's hand resting uselessly on her shoulder. The world seemed to hold its breath. After carefully reviewing all the evidence, testimony, and documentation, Judge Harrison's voice cut through the silence like a blade. The court finds no grounds for declaring Mr. Hansen incompetent to manage his business affairs. Relief should have washed over me like a tide, warm and comforting. And in a way it did, yet hollow, empty, leaving behind only the ache of what it had cost. The judge continued, each word striking the air like the toll of a bell. Furthermore, the evidence of financial irregularities and potential witness tampering raises serious concerns about the plaintiff's conduct. I saw Ida's shoulders slump forward as if a great invisible weight had finally crushed her. The fight, the fire, the defiance that had driven her these past months extinguished in an instant. She looked smaller, diminished, not the confident woman who once believed she could take the empire from my hands, but the daughter I had raised, now utterly defeated. The case is dismissed. Mr. Hansen retains full control of Hansen Tech Corporation. Steve leaned toward me, his voice hushed but triumphant. Justice has prevailed, but justice, when it comes at the cost of your own child, feels more like a sentence than salvation. Michael extended his hand with the steady professionalism of a man who had fought and won countless battles in court. Congratulations, Y. Your competency has been vindicated. Vindicated. The word clung to my tongue like ash. It was meant to be a balm, but it tasted bitter metallic. Across the courtroom, James Corbin was already making his move, opportunistic as ever. Yesterday, he had thrown his weight behind Ida's so-called revolution. Today, he crossed the aisle like a seasoned politician, face set in practiced sincerity. Mr. Hansen, I want to express my full confidence in your continued leadership. I forced a smile. Of course, James. Business as usual. Laura Blake, once so composed, gathered her papers with mechanical precision. The proud gleam in her eyes was gone, replaced with the quiet devastation of someone who knew her career had suffered a wound that might never fully heal. Ida sat motionless, staring down at her hands as though they held the answers she had been seeking all along. The same hands that once clutched dolls once reached for mine when storms frightened her. The courtroom slowly emptied. Reporters scribbled furiously, hungry for their story. Shareholders leaned toward one another, whispering about strategies and futures. And the rest, the spectators, slipped back into their ordinary lives, leaving behind the wreckage of ours. I didn't move. I couldn't. Victory should have tasted sweet, but it curdled on my tongue. Steve touched my arm. You did what you had to do. But had I simply proven Ida right, that in the end I valued the company above everything, even her, Steve's words pressed on. You protected what you built, what we built. The company is safe, your reputation intact, the shareholders reassured. Yes, all of it preserved. Everything except the fragile bond between father and daughter. Ida rose at last, slow and unsteady, gathering her purse like a soldier collecting the remains of her dignity. Trevor waited by the doors, relief softening his face. His ordeal too was over. But when she turned to me, she looked so very small, so very breakable. I made a choice that surprised even me. Ida. She stopped, her eyes rimmed red but dry. There were no tears left. Dad, she whispered, her voice rough, frayed. This doesn't have to be the end of our story. Something flickered across her expression. Hope, fear, disbelief, all fighting for space in her tired face. I lost everything. No, I said softly, stepping closer. You only lost a battle. Not the war, not with life. Steve watched, carefully cautious. Michael pretended to shuffle papers, but I knew he was listening. Ida glanced at Trevor, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. She exhaled slowly. Not here. Coffee, somewhere neutral. I need time to process this. Of course, I answered. My voice cracked despite me. But remember, no matter what's happened, you're still my daughter. You're still brilliant. You're still capable of great things. Her composure faltered, then a crack in the armor she had built so carefully. She shook her head, whispering, Even after everything I did, I swallowed hard. Especially after everything you did. It took courage to challenge me, even if the way you did it was wrong. For the first time in months, her eyes softened. Elna's eyes, her mother's eyes, looked back at me full of confusion, hurt, and something else. Something that felt like possibility. I'll call you next week, she said finally. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. As she walked away with Trevor at her side, I felt something stir in me that I hadn't expected. Not victory, not vindication, hope. The company was mine. But maybe, just maybe, the family could still be saved. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end, but the fragile beginning of something better. 10 long days of silence, of waiting, of rehearsing words that never felt enough had led to this bench overlooking Lake Union. The water shimmered in the late afternoon sun, a liquid mirror of gold and silver ripples. Beyond the trees, Seattle's skyline stretched upward, like a series of unspoken promises, as if the city itself believed in renewal. I had arrived early, restless, needing space to gather courage. This conversation would not just decide the company's direction, it would decide if my daughter and I still had a future, or if all that remained between us was a courtroom transcript and a broken bond. At 3:15, she appeared. Ida, my daughter. She walked slowly across the grass, her steps careful, her figure outlined by sunlight. She wore jeans and a simple gray sweater, no tailored suit, no sharp business armor, none of the cold defenses she had worn like steel during the trial. She was just herself, vulnerable, human. My little girl groaned, but still carrying traces of the child I had once tucked into bed with stories. She sat down beside me, not too close, leaving space that felt both respectful and painful. "Dad," she said softly, her voice steady but cautious. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, afraid that if I spoke too soon, my voice would betray the storm inside me. "I've been thinking about what you said." "At the courthouse," she continued. Her gaze stayed on the water as if afraid of what she might see in my eyes. The lake lapped gently against the shore, filling the silence between us. Joggers passed behind, laughter echoing faintly from somewhere down the path. Normal life went on while we were here, trying to piece together the shattered remains of ours. Then she said the words that cut deeper than any lawyer's argument. "Dad, I never felt like you were proud of me." The sentence landed like a physical blow. My breath caught. I turned fully toward her, searching her face. "Ida," I began, but she went on, her voice trembling now. Every achievement I had, it felt invisible. Every success was overshadowed by the next board meeting, the next quarterly report. "I was your daughter, but I always felt like I had to compete with the company for your love. And I lost." My chest tightened. Shame, heavy and suffocating, pressed down on me. "I was always proud of you," I said, my voice raw. "Always. I didn't know how to show it." Her lips parted, disbelief flickering in her eyes. "Mom tried to tell you," she whispered. "She said, I need words, not just opportunities." And just like that, Elena's voice echoed across 5 long years, her wisdom alive again. "She needs your attention more than the company does." I closed my eyes, grief and regret swelling. "Your mother was wiser than I gave her credit for," I admitted quietly. Ida's voice cracked. "I wanted to prove I was worthy of your love." "My love doesn't need proof," I said quickly, desperate for her to understand. "It's unconditional." She gave a bitter, broken laugh. "Then why did it always feel so conditional? Why did every conversation turn into business? Why was Hansen always more important than me?" I stared out at the lake, watching a sailboat glide across the water, its white sails filled with the evening breeze. "How could I explain 3 decades of misguided devotion? I built Hansen for you," I whispered. "For our family's future. Every late night, every missed dinner, every sacrifice, I thought I was giving you security." She turned to me, her eyes glistening. "But you were giving me distance." "Yes," I said. The word was both confession and release. I was. I confused providing with parenting. I confused success with love. Her eyes filled and her voice broke. I needed a father, not a benefactor. The truth hung between us, painful but cleansing. For once, the silence was not hostile. It was honest. "When I filed that lawsuit," she said after a long pause, "I wasn't just fighting for control of the company. I was fighting for recognition that I mattered to you." I swallowed hard, guilt burning in my chest. "You've always mattered, Ida, more than anything. I just showed it, poorly, terribly." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her composure unraveling. "I nearly destroyed everything." I reached for her hand, though she didn't take it yet. "No, you nearly saved us." She blinked, startled. "How can you say that I embezzled money? I lied to shareholders. I tried to have you declared incompetent." "You forced honesty," I told her firmly. "You made us confront what was broken, what we refused to admit. In your rebellion, you gave us a chance to rebuild." The lake reflected the drifting clouds, the city bathed in late spring light. For the first time in years, possibility filled the air. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "That depends," I said. "Do you still want to modernize the company? Her eyes searched mine, wary but hopeful. You'd trust me with that? I let out a long breath, the weight of years finally lifting. What do you say about shared leadership? For the first time, she turned fully toward me, her face a mixture of disbelief, relief, and something that looked dangerously close to love. Are you ready to trust me with part of the company? I'm ready to trust you with the future of the company. Her breath caught in her chest, and for a moment she looked like the little girl who used to sit on my desk, scribbling pretend signatures on my papers. But she was no child now, she was a woman, my daughter, and she had fought me harder than anyone ever had. Meaning, co-CEOs, I continued softly, your innovation, my experience. Partnership instead of war. You'd do that after everything I've done. Because of everything you've done, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You were right about modernization, and I was right about culture. Together, we could build something Elena would be proud of. Her lips trembled. She stood abruptly, pacing to the water's edge. Lake Union shimmered behind her, reflecting a sun slowly tilting west. I watched her shoulders rise and fall as she processed the proposal, as if weighing not just the company's fate, but the entire history of our fractured relationship. Full partnership, she murmured half to herself. Equal authority, shared responsibility, father and daughter, leadership team. She turned back, her face unreadable. What about the board? Steve's already supportive. The shareholders crave stability and growth. We can provide both. And the employees, I let the words hang in the air. They'll respect the Hansen name. Both of us. Slowly she walked back toward me. This time when she sat, it was closer. Our knees nearly touched. I have conditions. Name them. Full transparency. No decisions without consultation. Modern technology implemented fully. Employee profit sharing. Agreed. My conditions, I countered. Maintaining company culture. Gradual changes, not a revolution overnight. And family time protected. She raised an eyebrow. Define family time. Weekly dinners. No business talk during Sophie's bedtime stories. Elena's foundation continues always. And for the first time in months, maybe years, she smiled. Not the brittle courtroom smile, not the bitter smirk of defiance. A real smile. Deal. I extended my hand. Partners. She shook it firmly. Partners. And then before I could breathe again, she leaned forward and hugged me. A tight, desperate, healing embrace. I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. I always have. We stayed like that by the lake as the light softened, father and daughter, no longer enemies, no longer strangers, becoming something new. Partners, family, future. The kitchen smelled of garlic rosemary and Elena's favorite recipe. For a heartbeat stepping inside, I felt her presence warm, guiding, reminding us of what mattered. Ada moved between stove and counter with quiet confidence, but tonight her movements had a grace they hadn't carried in so long. This wasn't just cooking. This was celebration. Dad, she said, her tone almost playful. I made your favorite dish. I held up a neatly wrapped package, wearing the smile my own father had once worn when handing me gifts. Something smells like your mother's cooking. Same recipe, she replied, her eyes softening, same love. The dining table glowed under candlelight, the good china set out not stiffly formal, but with reverence. Sophie bounded in her little dress, dotted with paint stains, her hair bouncing with each step. Grandpa Sophie. I crouched down, presenting her the package. Grandpa brought you something special. She ripped through the paper with the impatient glee of a 4-year-old revealing a tiny business suit. The jacket hung oversized in her small hands. Her eyes widened. Will I be the boss someday, sweetheart? I said, my throat tightening. Someday, you just might be. Her laughter filled the room, pure and unburdened. Trevor entered, architectural plans tucked under his arm. He looked around the room, relief etched into his features. I'm glad we're one family again. So am I replied. And for once I meant it with no reservations. Dinner flowed like music. Sophie chattered about preschool adventures. Trevor spoke of his museum project downtown. Ida outlined her vision for Hansen Tech's modernization. Her words balanced, ambitious yet respectful. The best of both worlds, I said, raising my glass. She nodded, her eyes shining. After dessert, Ida slid a manila folder onto the table. The partnership agreement, Simple, elegant binding, equal authority, defined responsibilities, clear dispute resolution protocols. Two stubborn leaders finally learning how to lead together. Sophie looked up at us solemn. Are you not sad anymore? I knelt to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. No, sweetheart, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Not anymore. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. Now Grandpa is happy because Mommy and Grandpa are friends again. Sophie's innocent voice carried through the dining room like a benediction. She didn't realize the weight of what she had just said, but I felt it settle in my chest, heavy and healing all at once. Because we're family again, I added softly, my throat tightening. I picked up the pen with hands that no longer trembled. For months they had shaken signing court documents, reading depositions, flipping through files filled with accusations and shame. But tonight they were steady. Tonight they held something stronger than contract's redemption. My name etched across the page with a quiet certainty I hadn't felt in years. Ida followed her signature, bold, confident, unflinching. The same boldness she had shown in court when she stood against me. But now it was different. This wasn't the boldness of battle. It was the boldness of belief in herself, in me, in us. Trevor slipped away and returned with a chilled bottle of champagne, a knowing smile on his face. I thought we might celebrate, he said, producing glasses as though he had been waiting for this moment all along. Perfect timing, I murmured. We gathered in the dining room, 4 glasses lifted high, while 3 crystal glasses and 1 smaller plastic cup of apple juice clutched by Sophie's tiny hands. 4 generations represented in spirit and flesh, past, present, and future standing, shoulder to shoulder. To Hanson Tech's new future, Ada declared, her eyes shining with conviction. To family partnerships, I added, to not fighting anymore. Sophie held her cup as solemnly as a priest at an altar. To not fighting anymore, she repeated, her voice small but pure. Laughter bubbled up, breaking the formality as we carefully clinked glasses low enough for Sophie to join without spilling. Then Trevor raised his higher. To Elena, who would have loved seeing this moment. We echoed together a chorus bound by memory. To Elena. Her presence filled the room like candlelight, soft, undeniable. I felt her in Ida's smile and Sophie's laughter, in Trevor's steady hand on my shoulder. The champagne slid down smooth and cool, but it didn't taste like luxury. It tasted like hope, like new beginnings. What happens Monday? Sophie asked, her eyes wide as though the world's biggest mystery was about to unfold. Monday, Ida said, brushing a curl from Sophie's forehead. Mommy and Grandpa go to work together. Like a team, exactly like a team. I lifted Sophie into my arms, spinning her gently, her laughter ringing through the house. The best team in Seattle, I promised. Outside, summer stretched long into the evening, warm air, long sunsets, the promise of new beginnings written across the horizon. Inside, we were beginning too. Not the same family we had been before, betrayal and lawsuits and courtroom battles. Something sturdier, something forged in fire and made whole in forgiveness. As night deepened, we moved to the living room. Sophie spread her latest drawings across the rug, narrating each picture with the seriousness only a child can muster. Ida leaned against Trevor, discussing schedules for the coming week. Plans, routines, simple domestic life things I had once dismissed as trivial, but now recognized as sacred. By 8:30, it was time for me to leave. Sophie stuffed her artwork into my arms, crayon-colored pages, filled with smiling stick figures labeled Grandpa and Mommy. My heart swelled as I promised her I'd hang them in my office. See you Monday, partner. Ida said at the door, her voice strong but warm. See you Monday, daughter, I answered, and for the first time the word felt complete. The drive home wound through Seattle's familiar streets. I passed Hanson Tower, still standing tall against the skyline, a monument to my sacrifices. I passed the courthouse, where we had nearly destroyed each other. I passed Pike Place Market, where truths had slipped loose like spilled fruit, rolling until they couldn't be ignored. Every landmark felt like a stepping stone, each one leading not to endings but to tomorrow, to partnership, to family, to the future Elena had dreamed of long before we ever saw it. At last I parked in my Capitol Hill driveway. I didn't get out immediately. Instead, I sat in the quiet car, the city buzzing faintly around me, and unfolded Sophie's drawings. Stick figures stood side by side at desks taller than they were, one labeled Grandpa, one Mommy, both smiling as wide as children's crayons could draw. A 4-year-old's vision of harmony, the simplest business plan, the perfect legacy. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.